Puss in Boots, written by Curtis Norris. Once there was a handsome young man called Francis. His family was poor, and one day his father said, "It's time for you to seek your fortune. All I can give you is this cat." So Francis left with the cat. Suddenly, the cat spoke. "I can help you make your fortune, but I need a pair of boots, a black hat, and a bag." Francis was kind, and he gave the cat what he wanted. The cat was delighted with his boots. "From now on, call me Puss in Boots." Then he ran off, but quickly returned with a fat rabbit in his bag. "I'll give this to the king as a gift from you, the Duke of Bluewater." Each day, Puss took gifts to the king, saying they were from his master. The king was always very grateful. One day, as Francis and Puss were walking by a river, the cat saw the king and his daughter approaching in a carriage. "Quick, master, remove your clothes and jump in." Francis did, and as the carriage neared, Puss called through the window. "Sire, help! My master was swimming in the lake and some robbers took his clothes." The king remembered the gifts and gave Francis a fine new outfit. Francis approached the carriage looking very handsome. Puss said, "My master owns that castle on the hill." The princess fell in love with Francis and said, "Join us. We will take you to your castle." When they had gone, Puss ran to the castle. It belonged to a greedy ogre. Puss called, "Hey, ogre, I hear you can do magic, but I bet you cannot turn into a mouse."
That is easy. Look."
The ogre became a mouse. Puss quickly grabbed the mouse and put it in his bag. So Francis lived in the castle and married the princess. They lived happily ever after with that clever Puss in Boots.
The Monster and the Farmer, written by Catherine Osornio. There once lived a farmer in a village. He was famous for being hard-working and very clever. Nearby, there was a mean monster that often harmed the crops. One evening, the monster appeared in the farmer's field and yelled, "Here's a new field to destroy!" The farmer was very scared. The farmer brought out a chest of gold and said, "Here's my savings. Please take it and leave my field alone." The monster laughed. He had no use for money. "Give me food for the next 3 harvests, or I will destroy your field," the monster ordered. "After a month, I will come back to take all that grows on the ground." Thinking for a while, the farmer nodded and agreed. When it was harvest time, the monster was back. But all he got were the radish greens that grew on the ground. The monster was mad. He said, "Next time, I want the roots that grow under the ground." The next harvest time came, and the monster was back again. But all he got were the rice roots that grew under the ground. The monster was angry. He said, "Next time, I want the roots and the leaves." Soon, the next harvest came, and the monster returned. The farmer said, "As promised, I only took the corn cobs. All the leaves, stalks, and roots are for you." Then the monster realized that the clever farmer had fooled him, but he could not do anything. Angry, the monster went far away and was never seen again.
The Wild Swans. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who had 11 sons and one daughter named Alyssa. They lived happily together until one day the queen died and the king remarried a wicked queen. She sent Alyssa to a remote village to live with a poor peasant and turned the 11 brothers into swans.
Fly out into the woods,
said the wicked queen.
Make sure that I would never see you again. If not, I would kill you all.
Poor Alyssa lived a lonely life without her brothers. As she grew into a lovely young woman, she went back to the palace to find her father and brothers. Right after seeing beautiful Alyssa, the wicked queen got jealous. The queen tried to cast spells on Alyssa, but Alyssa was so pure that all the spells had no effect on her. Then the queen put a dark ointment on Alyssa's skin, which made Alyssa very ugly, so that the king didn't recognize her.
"Someone has taken away my daughter,"
the king said.
"This is not her. Away with whomever this is."
Oh
no! Alyssa had to leave the palace. She went into the woods, hoping to find her brothers. She wandered around, eating wild apples and berries. Soon, she met a strange old woman.
Have you seen 11 princes anywhere in the woods?
Alyssa asked.
No, but I once saw 11 swans swimming in the lake at day, and by night they became young men,
replied the old woman. Alyssa hurried to the lake, hoping to find her brothers. There, she saw her face ugly in dark ointment. She washed her face and sat down to wait for the swans. As the sun set, Alyssa saw 11 swans flying toward the lake. They landed near where Alyssa was hiding. The sun went down and darkness fell. She saw the swans' feathers fall off, and 11 handsome princes stood in their places. Alyssa cried out, running to her brothers. They were so happy to see each other again.
My dear brothers,
Alyssa exclaimed.
I miss you all so much.
Elisa, how wonderful to see you.
One of the princes cried happily. They told Alyssa all that had happened to them. They lived in a land across the lake, and it was time for them to go back. They persuaded Alyssa to go with them.
"Come with us. We can make a net to carry you across, and we can live together again,"
one of the princes said to Alyssa. She agreed to go. So the next night, the princes weaved a strong net. Then, in the following morning, Alyssa was carried to a beautiful land with mountains, forests, and palaces.
Oh, wow!
The princes lived in a nice cave. Although Alyssa was now reunited with her brothers, she still wanted to break the spell that had been cast on the princes. One night, Alyssa had a strange dream in which a fairy appeared and told her,
You must weave 11 coats of nettles for your brothers, but you cannot speak until you finish everything. Otherwise, your brothers will be swans forever.
Alyssa woke up and exclaimed,
Oh, yes, I will do that.
Alyssa knew that it would be hard and painful work since the nettles would sting and burn her hands. She started to make coats from the nettle, but couldn't tell the brothers what she was doing. Her hands became blistered and sore.
Out!
One day, a young king came along. He saw Alyssa and fell in love with her at first sight. He said to Alyssa, "Come with me. You cannot live here. I will give you velvet and silk to wear." Alyssa couldn't speak, so she could not refuse and say no. So the king put Alyssa on his horse and galloped away to his lovely castle. His servants brought all the nettles and the coats. Soon, Alyssa became the queen and dressed in beautiful clothes every day. But she wanted to finish the coats for her brothers, so she continued to work on them. However, she couldn't explain to the king why she was weaving. In time, the people thought that Alyssa was practicing witchcraft. Since she couldn't speak to defend herself, they persuaded the king that her strange habit of gathering nettles and weaving coats was proof that she was a witch.
It's so strange what she is doing. She must be a witch,
one servant said to the king. But the king didn't believe. Alyssa tried to finish the coats quickly. At last, she finished all but one sleeve for her youngest brother's coat. One night, Alyssa ran out of nettles and was forced to collect more in a nearby church graveyard where a man was watching. He reported the incident to the king. Immediately, Alyssa was brought to trial for witchcraft. She could speak no word in her defense and was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. When she was taken to be burned at the stake, she still weaved the very last coat. As she was brought forward, the 11 swans flew down to her. Hurriedly, she threw each coat over each swan. The swans immediately became princes again, although the youngest still had a swan's wing where there was no sleeve. Alyssa could speak now.
I am innocent,
she exclaimed. Then Alyssa fainted from exhaustion, so her brothers explained for everyone and the king. As they did so, the firewood around Alyssa's stake miraculously takes root and bursts into flowers. The king plucks the topmost flower and placed it in Alyssa's bosom. Suddenly, Alyssa awoke. The king said sorry to Alyssa for misunderstanding her and asked her if she wanted to be the queen again. With all happiness and peace in her soul, Alyssa agreed. Since then, Alyssa lived with the king and her 11 brothers in the castle, happily ever after.
Master of all masters. Once there was a girl who wanted to get a job. She went to a job fair to apply for a position as a servant. At last, an old gentleman hired her and led her to his house. The man lived alone in an isolated house. He believed his knowledge was so great that he always called things by complex names. On the first day of work, the man taught his new servant all these unusual names. He said to her,
The first thing you need to know is, what will you call me?
Master, mister, or whatever you please, sir.
The servant answered,
You must call me master of all masters.
Said the man. He pointed to his bed and asked,
And what would you call this?
A bed or couch or whatever you please, sir.
She answered.
No, that's my barnacle. What about these?
He said, pointing to his pantaloons.
Breeches or trousers or whatever you please, sir.
She answered.
You must call them squibs and crackers.
The master said.
And what would you call her?
Asked he, pointing to his cat.
Cat or kitty or whatever you please, sir.
She answered.
You must call her white-faced simony. Now this.
The master gestured to the fire.
What would you call it?
Fire or flame or whatever you please, sir.
She answered.
You must call it hot cockalorum. And what about this?
The master went on, pointing to the water.
Water or wet or whatever you please, sir.
She answered.
No, Pondalorum is its name. And what do you call this?
The master asked, pointing to the house.
House or cottage or whatever you please, sir.
She answered.
No, you must call it High Topper Mountain,
replied the master. The servant listened and carefully wrote down everything her master said. Unluckily, that night, a fire suddenly broke out. The servant woke her master in a fright and cried,
Master of all masters, get out of your barnacle and put on your squibs and crackers. For white-faced simony has got a spark of hot cockalorum on its tail. And unless you get some pondalorum, High Topper Mountain will be all on hot cockalorum.
Because these names were so long and complex, it took the servant a while to finish what she was saying. But the fire spread so quickly that by then it was too late. The master and servant only escaped death by inches and had to watch their house burn to the ground. What a shame! If only the man had not complicated matters, he and the servant could have stopped the fire and saved the house.
The Three Feathers. Once there was a king who had 3 sons. The 2 older sons were clever and proud, but the youngest son was humble and kind. As the king grew old and tired, one day he called his sons together and said,
My dear sons, I do not have long to live, and one of you will become king when I am gone. Therefore, I will send you all out on a quest to find a carpet. Whoever brings me the finest one will be my successor."
The two older sons thought it would surely be one of them. They did not think that their younger brother was smart enough to do anything right. The king said,
"To begin the quest, I will throw 3 feathers into the air. You will start your search in whatever direction your feather falls."
The king threw the feather in the air for the oldest son. It drifted to the east. The feather for the second son fell towards the west. But the younger son's feather fell to the ground near a trap door. Immediately, the two older sons set off on their search. The oldest prince met a peddler selling carpets and demanded that the peddler unload the goods for him to see.
Okay.
The prince quickly looked through the carpets and chose the one he thought was the most beautiful. Then the peddler rolled the carpet up and put it on the prince's horse. As the oldest prince was about to ride off, the peddler asked for the money for his carpet. The prince looked down on the peddler and said,
"Do you know who I am? I am the king's son, and I don't have to pay you anything."
With that, the prince quickly rode off to the palace. The second son went west to a carpet maker's shop. He looked at all the beautiful carpets and chose the one he thought was the best. When it came time to pay the money for the carpet, the second oldest prince threw a few coins on the ground, grabbed the carpet, and left. The youngest son was still at home and felt very sad. Where was he to go to get a carpet? Then he noticed the trap door near the spot where the third feather had landed. He decided to open the door and go down the stairs to a basement. He saw a huge green door in the basement. He knocked, and a big frog opened the door.
What do you want?
The frog croaked.
Do you happen to have any carpets?
The youngest son asked.
My father is the king, and he has sent me to find the most beautiful carpet in the land.
Come and see,
said the frog. The youngest son found himself in a room filled with frogs. They asked him to help them dig a hole in the ground to build a lily pond. The young prince did without complaining. Then, when the prince finished digging, he said to the frogs,
I have to go now to try and find a carpet.
But the chief frog said to the prince,
Because you have been so kind to us, we'll give you a carpet.
The frogs gave the prince a parcel in which a carpet was packed and told him not to open it until he showed it to his father. The prince thanked the frogs and returned to the king. All three princes showed their carpets to the king. When the youngest son unrolled his carpet, it was the most beautiful of all. The older brothers were very angry. because they did not want the youngest to rule the kingdom. They asked the king to give them another challenge.
All right.
The king agreed.
Whoever brings me the most beautiful ring will inherit my kingdom.
Again, the king threw 3 feathers into the air to direct his sons on their quest. 1 feather flew east, 1 flew west, and the 3rd feather fell on the ground by the trap door. The older sons were more determined than ever that one of them should rule the kingdom.
He won't be so lucky this time,
the oldest prince said to the second one. Back to the basement, the youngest prince told the frogs about the ring. The frogs promised to help the prince if he could remove a big rock that was keeping the water from flowing into the lily pond. The prince gladly did so, although it was a hard work. After the youngest prince had finished, the frogs gave him a little box with a ring. Again, he was told not to open the box until he met the king. The prince thanked the frogs and took the ring back to his father. When the sons presented their rings to the king, the older sons were enraged when they saw that youngest son had the most beautiful ring.
This can't be right.
The second prince cried.
Our younger brother isn't fit to rule. We are smarter than he is. We demand another test.
Reluctantly, the king agreed.
Then go and bring me the most beautiful woman in the kingdom,
the king said to the princes. Again, the king threw out the feathers. 1 flew east, 1 flew west, and 1 fell by the trap door. The other 2 brothers dashed off. They were in such a hurry to get back and be chosen to rule the kingdom. So they each grabbed the first beautiful woman they saw, even when the woman did not want to come with them. Meanwhile, the youngest son knocked on the frog's door again and told them what he needed.
This time, the king wants me to bring him the most beautiful woman in the kingdom,
the youngest prince said. The chief frog thought for a moment.
This is not easy task, but because you have been so good to us, we'll help you.
The chief frog then called a tiny frog out and spoke some magic words. Immediately, the little frog turned into a lady of great beauty. The youngest son was so glad. He thanked the frog and quickly took the beautiful lady back to see the king. The king and the older brothers were amazed at the beauty of the woman coming with the youngest prince. Everyone said she was the most beautiful woman they had ever seen. The king was very delighted. He declared,
"No more contests. When I die, my youngest son will rule the kingdom."
The 2 older brothers gave up their desires to be the next successor of the king and happily admitted the result. Regarding the youngest prince, thanks to his kindness, he married the most beautiful woman and later on be the next ruler of the kingdom. He had taught his 2 older brothers a lesson that one kindness deserved another.
The Snow Queen. Once upon a time, in Lapland, the Snow Queen lived in a mountain-top castle covered with ice and snow. She had a magic mirror that made everything appear to be the opposite of what it really was. Things that were beautiful looked ugly in the mirror, and things that were good looked bad. That made the Snow Queen very happy. One day, the magic mirror broke into 1,000,000 pieces. They fell and landed all over the earth. Some pieces landed in a small village where Kay and Gerda lived. Kay and Gerda were friends. That day, when they were playing, a piece of the broken mirror fell and hit Kay in his eye, and another piece fell into his heart. It changed his views about everything. Instead of being nice to Gerda, Kay made fun of her and would hit her every time he could. Gerda did not know what had happened. She had no idea why Kay was acting so strangely, but she still wanted to be friends with him. One day, Kay and some other children decided to go on a sleigh ride through the snow. Gerda wanted to come too. However, Kay and his new friends ran so fast that Gerda could not keep up with them. Before long, they were deep into the woods. Gerda could no longer see Kay and his friends, and she decided to go home. As Kay and his friends came into the clearing, a big sleigh pulled by a team of reindeer appeared.
Step inside,
the driver invited Kay. The driver then lifted her hood. She was a woman whose face sparkled as bright as a diamond.
Who are you?
Kay asked in amazement.
I am the Snow Queen,
the sparkling woman replied.
And now I will take you to my kingdom.
Before Kay could reply, the Snow Queen pulled on the reins, and the sleigh and the reindeer flew up into the sky. They rode higher and higher. The sleigh soared high over clouds and into a distant land. Some days passed, but Gerda didn't see Kay come back. She wondered what had happened to him. She looked everywhere but could not find him. Gerda even searched the forest where she met a talking reindeer.
Have you seen Kay?
Gerda asked tearfully.
Yes, I have,
said the reindeer.
The Snow Queen took him away on her sleigh to Lapland. Where is that?
Gerda asked.
A country far to the north,
the reindeer said.
I can take you there if you want, and we can search for him.
Gerda agreed, and they began their journey. Many days passed. They traveled through forests, meadows, and over mountains. Finally, they arrived in Lapland. When Gerda and the reindeer got there, they met a witch.
Have you seen the Snow Queen and a boy?
Gerda asked.
Yes,
the witch replied.
The Snow Queen took the boy to her castle. Since he has glass from the magic mirror inside of him, it is probably best that he stays there for now. The Snow Queen's castle is cold and dark. It is made entirely out of ice. What is a magic mirror?
Gerda asked. The witch explained how the Snow Queen had made it, and when it broke, its magic spread wherever the pieces landed.
Oh no! My poor friend! Please, show me the way to the castle. I must see him.
Gerda told the witch. Meanwhile, the Snow Queen had a challenge for Kay.
If you can spell the word eternity from letters made of ice, I will let you go.
Kay tried again and again, but he could not spell eternity from the ice letters. He was about to give up when he saw Gerda entering the castle. Gerda cried out with joy and hugged Kay. Her warm tears fell on him, and his cold heart began to melt, destroying the magic of the Snow Queen's mirror. Kay also started to weep. When Gerda and Kay's warm tears fell on the ice letters, they magically moved and spelled out the word eternity. Once that happened, the Snow Queen let Kay go. Kay returned home with Gerda. They remained good friends for their entire lives.
The King Midas and the Golden Touch. Many years ago, there was a rich king named Midas. The king grew so fond of gold, better than anything else in the whole world. One day, while he was in his gold room, a fairy boy appeared in front of him. The fairy's face shone with a wonderful light, and he had wings on his back. King Midas, you are the richest man in the world, said the fairy boy. There is no king who has as much gold as you do.
Of course I have the most gold in the world,
boasted the king.
but I want much more, for gold is the best and the most wonderful thing in the world.
Are you sure? asked the fairy boy.
I am very sure,
answered the king. If I should grant you one wish, said the fairy boy, would you ask for more gold?
If I could have one wish,
said the king,
I would ask that everything I touch should turn into beautiful yellow gold.
Your wish shall be granted, said the fairy boy. At sunrise tomorrow morning, your slightest touch will turn everything into gold. But I warn you that your gift will not make you happy.
I will take the risk,
said the king. The next day, King Midas awoke very early. He wanted to see if the fairy's promise had come true. As soon as the sun arose, he tried the gift by touching the bed lightly with his hand. The bed turned into gold. He touched the chair and table. Instantly, they changed into solid gold. The king was wild with joy. He ran around the room, touching everything he could see. His magic gift turned everything he touched into shining yellow gold. The king was hungry, and he went down to eat his breakfast. But when he lifted a glass of clear, cold water to drink, it became solid gold. Not a drop of water could pass his lips. The bread turned to gold under his fingers. The meat was hard, yellow, and shiny. The king was not able to eat anything. Everything he touched was gold, gold, and gold. The king's little daughter came in from the garden. Without thinking, the king gently kissed her. At once, the little girl transformed into a golden statue. A great fear crept into King Midas's heart, sweeping all the joy out of his life. In his grief, the king called out loudly for the fairy who had given him the gift of the golden touch.
Help! Help! Oh, fairy,
He begged.
please take away this horrible golden gift. Take all my lands. Take all my gold. Take everything. Only give me back my little daughter.
In a moment, the fairy boy appeared and asked, "Do you still think that gold is the greatest thing in the world?"
No, no,
cried the king.
I can't stand the sight of the golden stuff.
"Are you sure that you no longer wish for the golden touch?" asked the fairy.
I have learned my lesson.
Said the king.
I no longer think that gold is the greatest thing in the world.
"Very well," said the fairy. "Take this pitcher to the spring in the garden and fill it with water. Then sprinkle the things you have touched." Midas took the pitcher and rushed to the spring. As soon as he returned, he sprinkled his dear little girl. Instantly, she became his own sweet daughter again and gave him a kiss. The king sprinkled his food, and to his great joy, it turned back to real bread and butter. Then the king and his little daughter sat down to have breakfast. How good the cold water tasted! How eagerly the hungry king ate the good food! Ever since then, King Midas became a better king, generous and grateful for all goods in his life.
The Goose Girl. Once upon a time, there was a princess named Annie. Annie loved to ride in the fields upon her horse, Falada. Falada could talk, so Annie and Falada would speak together. One day, Annie's father, the king, fell off his horse while he was out riding and died. The queen had only her daughter now. Soon, it became time for Annie to go to the next country to marry the prince who lived there. The queen gave Annie a handkerchief and said,
"Keep this handkerchief with you at all times. It will protect you against all evil."
Thank you, Mother.
said Annie. The queen bid her goodbye, and Annie and her maid set out. Annie rode her special horse, Falada, and the maid rode a pony. In time, they came to a brook, and the princess wanted a drink of water.
I am thirsty. Please bring me some water.
Annie asked her maid. The maid was rude and refused the princess's demand.
No, I will not. If you are thirsty, get down yourself and go down to the water. I will not be your maid anymore.
The maid replied. The princess was so thirsty that she got down off her horse, knelt over the brook, and drank water. As she did so, the handkerchief fell into the water and drifted away.
Oh no!
The maid saw it and knew that the princess was no longer protected. The maid insisted that she ride Falada and the princess would ride the pony. She made the princess wear her maid's clothes, and she wore the princess's royal clothes.
Aha! Now you will do what I say. Give me your horse to ride, and you will have my pony. Give me your clothes to wear, and you will have mine,
the maid said. Then the maid threatened.
Do not tell anyone what has happened.
Annie had to promise. They entered the neighboring kingdom and were greeted with great joy by the prince. The prince married the maid, and the real princess was sent to work with a goose boy. The maid was afraid that the horse Falada might tell someone the truth, so she talked to the prince.
Kill Falada, the horse. He caused a lot of trouble on the way.
Annie heard that Falada would be killed. She begged the goose boy, who had been ordered to kill Falada, to find a way to save it. The goose boy took pity on Annie, so he agreed. He brought Falada to a barn. Every day, Annie passed by to visit and talk to Falada. The goose boy was often nearby and heard their story. One day, the goose boy told the king everything he'd heard them say. The king realized that Annie was the real princess. The maid was sentenced to death for her lies and treachery. Then the real princess, Annie, became the prince's wife, and they lived happily ever after.
Icarus, the boy who flew too high. Once there was a man named Phaeton who had a very important job. Every day, Phaeton had to ride a chariot that pulled the sun across the sky. Otherwise, there would be no sunlight, which the crops needed to grow and people needed to survive. Because of this, Phaeton never got a holiday. His son, Icarus, was very proud of him. Icarus loved to boast to his friends about his father's important job.
Oh, that's nothing,
one boy told Icarus.
My father is the driver of the queen's golden chariot.
Icarus looked at his friend and asked,
Do you think driving the queen around is as important as driving the sun across the sky to bring light and heat to the world?
Well, when you put it that way, I guess not,
said the boy. One day, Icarus told his friends about how his father could not take any vacation from his job.
Well, why don't you offer to drive the chariot for him sometimes?
One of them asked, hoping Icarus would do this and get into trouble. Icarus liked the idea very much. He could already see himself racing across the sky and telling the horses where to go.
Okay, I will ask him,
Icarus said. That evening, Icarus spoke to his father.
Papa, can I drive the chariot for you tomorrow?
Icarus, my dear son,
His father replied.
you're not ready for such a big job. The whole world counts on me to make the sun rise in the east, to lead it across the sky, and to let it set in the west.
But why, Papa? Please let me. I can handle it,
Icarus said.
You heard me.
His father said.
If you improve your grades, maybe.
Icarus was determined to drive the chariot, so he did the best he could in school. But it was not good enough. His classmate kept teasing him and asking when he was going to drive the chariot. One evening, Icarus asked his father how he drove the chariot across the sky. His father explained,
You have to be very careful with the horses, because they are very powerful. You have to guide them gently. Don't rush them, or the sun will set too quickly in some places and rise too early in the others.
Icarus had never thought about that. The father continued.
Then you can't fly too high, or you won't be able to breathe and will be faint. You also can't drive too close to the earth, or the sun will burn up the crops and the people.
Icarus listened carefully. This was really an important job. Maybe he should not do what he was planning. But then he remembered the teasing of his classmates. Also, he wanted to know what it was like to ride the chariot. Very early the next morning, before his father woke up, Icarus crept out of bed and hitched the horses to the chariot. Then he grabbed the reins and was off up into the sky. It felt good to be flying above the whole world. Icarus whipped the horses to make them go faster. The people on Earth were surprised that the sun seemed to rise extra early that day. Then all sorts of strange things began to happen. The sun shone for only a short time in some places. In others, the heat began to scorch crops, and people had to stay indoors because it was too hot. Icarus was finding it was hard to control the horses. Oh no! He let them fly too high, so he fainted. Without guidance, the horses went wherever they liked. They headed east, so the other side grew dark. Then they headed west, and the sun set too early. Then they headed east again, and the sun rose once more. Everyone was confused. They didn't know when to get up, get to work, go to school, or go to bed. After a while, Icarus woke up. He was very scared for what he had done. He tried to control the horses and headed back home. When Icarus was back, his father angrily asked,
Why on earth did you do something like that?
I'm sorry, Papa. I just wanted to show my friends that I could drive the chariot like you.
Well, now you know why I can't let you drive the chariot for a very, very long time,
said his father.
I understand, Papa.
Icarus agreed. Icarus now knew that what he did was not only foolish, but also dangerous. As he went off to bed, he promised himself never to do anything like that, except with his father's permission.
The Selfish Giant. Once there was a beautiful garden. The garden was filled with fruit trees and many kinds of beautiful flowers. Children from the village loved to play in the garden. As soon as school was out for the day, they always came to play there. A big old castle sat at the back of the garden. According to legend, a giant once lived there, but he had been gone for a very long time. The giant had been gone so long that no one expected to see him again. One day, the children in the garden heard loud thumping sounds. The thumping was so loud that it shook the earth.
What could that be?
The children asked each other. Then they looked up and saw the giant. The giant was very angry.
How dare you children play in my garden?
The giant yelled.
Go away and do not come back again.
The giant put up signs telling everyone to stay away. Then he built a tall stone wall around his garden.
That should keep those children out? Ha 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 ha!
The giant laughed to himself. Then he went inside to sleep. The plants in the garden were not happy that the giant had returned. The trees and flowers enjoyed the company of the children from the village, but the children were no longer around. The warm sunbeams also decided to leave the giant's garden. Because the giant chased the children out, winter came quickly to his garden. No plants grew, and the weather was cold all the time. When spring and summer came to the village, it did not come to the giant's garden. The giant went back to bed and slept some more. One day, the giant woke up to the sound of a chirping bird. He looked out the window and saw that spring had returned to the garden. Then he discovered that the children found a way into the garden through a gap in the stone wall. The giant now saw the error of his ways and decided to take down the wall. But when he opened the castle door, the children ran away. The giant then saw a boy who was trying to climb a tree. The giant bent over and gently helped the boy climb up onto the branch. He sat down and said,
It is your garden now. I am truly sorry for chasing you away.
The giant then went to work, knocking down the big stone wall. The children all came to play in the garden, and spring returned. For many years, the giant lived in the castle, and he happily played with all the children from the village that came to visit.
The Canary Prince. Once upon a time, there lived a king with his wife and a little daughter. After the wife died, the king was left to raise the daughter alone. The daughter, Primrose, had a very sweet-sounding voice. Soon, the king remarried. The new queen had a terrible voice that sounded like a shriek. She was jealous of Primrose's sweet-sounding voice and wanted to get rid of Primrose. So the new queen held a feast for the king and kept on giving him wine until he was drunk. Then she had the king sign an order for Primrose to be sent far away to live alone in a tower. Locked inside the tower to keep herself busy, Primrose sang. One day, a prince passed by and heard her sweet-sounding voice. He stopped and threw a stone at the tower's window to get Primrose's attention. The prince shouted,
"Who are you? And why are you locked away in this tower?"
Primrose told him all about the queen who had locked her away. The prince listened and said,
"I'll be back. I am going to find a way to get you out of there."
Then he rode away. One day, Primrose found an old book in the attic of the tower. She was happy to have something to read. However, she did not know it was a magical book. While reading it, Primrose found an old note with a spell, which said if the spell was spoken 3 times, someone or something would be turned into anything. Primrose decided to try casting the spell. She saw a butterfly and used the spell to change it into a bird. It worked. She was very excited. Primrose wondered if she could use the spell to escape from the tower. So she gave it a try. Poor Primrose, the spell did not work on herself. The next day, the prince came back, but how could he enter the tower? Primrose cast the spell on the prince. It worked. The prince became a canary and flew to her. This happened every time the prince came to visit. A week later, Primrose's cruel stepmother came to the tower. She saw the prince by the window talking to Primrose. The wicked queen was furious. She quickly climbed up the tower. All she saw was a canary flying out the window. The queen forced Primrose to tell her how a prince entered the tower.
How could that strange man come up here?
The wicked queen asked.
I don't know who is the man you're talking about,
Primrose answered. The queen was so angry and said,
Okay then, If you don't tell the truth, I will find him and kill him.
Oh no! He is innocent! Primrose exclaimed with fear. Then poor Primrose had to tell the queen about the spell in the book. The queen grabbed the book and threw into the fire right away.
Let's see if your prince can come and rescue you now.
The queen said. However, this did not bother Primrose at all. She had spoken the spell so many times, so she knew it by heart. Whenever the prince came to the tower, Primrose would recite the spell, and the prince would come flying up as a canary. But the next time the queen came by, she saw the canary and knew it was the prince. Quickly, the queen took out her bow and arrow and shot the canary prince. The prince, in the shape of a canary, was struck in his heart. Primrose cried out,
"Oh, what should I do now?"
Then she recited the spell. The canary prince turned back into a human. Day by day, Primrose nursed the prince until he got better. After a long search for his son, the prince's father came by the tower and saw his son's horse. He called the prince's name loudly. The prince heard his father's voice and looked out of the window. He was so surprised. Then he happily shouted,
"Father, I'm here!"
The father looked up and asked,
"How did you get up there?"
The prince told his father about all that had happened. After listening, the king ordered his men to knock down the tower and free his son and Primrose. Then Primrose and the prince returned to the prince's land. They got married before long and lived happily ever after.
The 5 Ps. Once there were 5 peas lying in a pod. The peas in the pod were green, so they thought the whole world was green. The peas grew, and they all sat in a row. Day after day, they sat inside the pod. They wondered if they would ever get out.
"Are we to sit here forever?"
asked one of the 5 peas.
"Will we become hard if we sit here all the time?"
asked another.
"There must be something outside. I am sure of it,"
said yet another. Weeks passed. The peas and their pod became yellow.
"All the world is turning yellow, I suppose,"
one pea said. Suddenly, they felt someone pull at the pod. It was torn off, and human hands put it into a jacket pocket alongside other pods.
"Yeah, now we will get out at last,"
one pea said.
"I'd like to know which of us will travel the farthest,"
said the smallest pea.
"Whatever happens, happens,"
said the biggest pea. Crack went the shell, and the 5 peas rolled out into the bright sunshine. They were held tightly in a boy's hand.
"These are fine peas for my pea shooter,"
the boy cried happily. He put one in and shot it out.
"I am flying out into the wide world. Catch me if you can,"
said the first pea. But then he flew up into a gutter on the roof. and ended up in a pigeon's stomach.
I want to fly straight to the sun,
said the second pea. But then he fell into a bucket of water and lay there in the dirty water. A few weeks later, he swelled to a great size and burst open.
Wherever we land, we will go to sleep,
the next two peas said, and away they went. But soon they tumbled to the ground, and then were also eaten by pigeons.
Whatever happens, happens,
said the last pea as he was shot out of the pea shooter. Up he flew toward an attic window. He landed in a little crack which was almost filled with moss. The moss closed around him, and there he lay trapped.
Whatever happens, happens,
he said. In the attic, there lived a poor woman and her little daughter. The girl had been very sick in bed for a whole year, and she was getting worse. One spring morning, the girl noticed something at the bottom of the window.
Mother, what is that green thing peeking through the window?
asked the girl. The mother looked out the window and saw that a pea plant had started to grow.
Now you have a little garden to watch,
she said. The girl's bed was moved closer to the window so that she could see the little plant better. That evening, the girl said,
The sunshine has been making the pea plant strong, and it grew a little more today. I feel a little better too. I think I will get up and go out into the warm sunshine soon.
I hope so,
said the mother, but she didn't really believe it quite yet. She took a little stick and put it beside the pea plant for it to climb up. Every day, the plant grew more, and soon a flower began to form.
There is a flower coming soon,
said the mother.
Oh, that will be lovely,
exclaimed the girl. The mother began to believe that her daughter might get better. The girl spoke more cheerfully and sat up in bed more. Her eyes sparkled when she looked at her little garden. A week later, the girl sat in a chair by the open window for an hour. She felt quite happy in the warm sunshine as she looked at the beautiful pink blossom in full bloom. She leaned over and kissed its pretty leaves.
I think the pea has come down from heaven. It brings joy and health to you and hope to me, my dear child,
said the happy mother. The last little pea proved to be the happiest of all because he had blessed those around him with his life.
Rapunzel. Once upon a time, there lived a husband and wife who longed for a child. Their house had a little window at the back where they could see a splendid garden next door. It was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. There was a high wall around it, and it belonged to an enchantress whom everyone feared. The couple was expecting a child at last. They were so happy that the wife had become pregnant.
One day, the woman looked out the window and saw the most beautiful Rapunzel plant. It looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. "I so wish I could have some to eat," she thought. As she longed for it so much, she became pale and ill. Her husband asked her,
"Why are you so pale, my dear?"
"Oh," she answered, "if I don't get some of the Rapunzel from the garden behind our house to eat, I shall die." Her husband, who loved her dearly, thought,
"I cannot let my wife die. I must bring her some of the Rapunzel, no matter the cost."
That evening, he clambered over the wall into the garden and hastily picked a handful of Rapunzel. As he tried to go back over the wall, to his horror, he saw the enchantress standing before him.
"How dare you climb into my garden and steal my Rapunzel? You will pay dearly for this by giving me the child that your wife will bring into the world,"
she said in an angry voice. In his fear, the man had to agree. When the little one was born, the enchantress appeared and took the child. She named the little girl Rapunzel. Rapunzel became the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress locked her in a tower in the forest. The tower had no stairs or door, only a window at the very top. Whenever the enchantress wanted to get in, she called from below, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had beautiful, long, golden hair. When she heard the enchantress's voice, she untied her braids, wound them around a hook by the window, and let her hair fall down for the enchantress to climb up. One day, when the enchantress was gone out, a prince was riding through the forest and heard beautiful singing. He stopped to listen. It was Rapunzel. He tried to find a way into the castle, but there was none. He came back to the forest often to listen to her. One time, he saw the enchantress come and noticed how she got up into the tower. The prince had heard of the story of the infant who had been taken away. He realized that this was Rapunzel. He hurried to her parents to tell them where she was.
"I have found your daughter, Rapunzel,"
he said. They waited until the enchantress left the tower for the day, then came close to it. Her real mother called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair!" Immediately, Rapunzel let down her hair, and her real mother climbed up it. At first, Rapunzel was frightened when she saw a woman she had never seen before. Her mother said, "I am your real mother. The enchantress took you from me when you were born." The mother hugged Rapunzel and cried, "I have waited for this moment for so long. Please, come with us and get out of here. I have a silk rope with which you can climb down." Together, they climbed down, and when Rapunzel's feet touched the ground, the enchantress's spell was broken. Rapunzel married the prince, and they lived happily ever after. The Frog Prince. One fine evening, a young princess went out to take a walk in a wood. She came to where there was a cool spring and sat down. She had a golden ball in her hand, which she was tossing up into the air and catching again. But one time, when she threw it up, she missed catching it. It rolled along the ground and fell into the spring. The princess looked into the spring, but it was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. She started to cry bitterly. Suddenly, a frog stuck its head out of the water and said,
"Princess, why do you cry so bitterly?"
"My golden ball has fallen into the spring, and I can't get it back. But what can you do for me, you ugly frog?" she asked. The frog replied,
"If it means that much to you, I will dive down and bring the ball back to you. But you must promise me something in return. You will let me live with you, eat from your golden plate, and sleep on your bed."
"What nonsense!" thought the princess. "He can never get out of the spring to visit me." So she said to the frog, "I promise that if you bring me my ball, I will do as you ask." Then the frog dove deep to the bottom of the spring. After a little while, he came up again with the ball. He tossed it up onto the grass. As soon as the princess saw her ball, she picked it up, ran home, and forgot all about the frog.
"Wait for me,"
said the frog. The next day, as the princess sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise. A little voice cried out at the door that said,
"Open the door, dear princess. Remember what you promised me by the cool waters of the spring."
When she heard it, she was very frightened and started crying in fear. The king, her father, asked her,
"What's the matter?"
"There is an ugly frog at the door who lifted my ball out of the spring for me yesterday. I told him that he could live with me here. I thought he could never get out of the spring, but he is here at the door and he wants to come in," she said. The king said to the princess,
"You made a promise, and you must keep it. Go and let the frog in."
The princess went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in. He followed her to her chair and asked to be put next to her plate. He ate from her golden plate until he was full. The princess had to take him upstairs to her bed, where he slept all night. When it was morning, he jumped down, hopped downstairs, and went out of the door. "At last, he is gone, and I am rid of him," thought the princess. But when night came, she again heard tapping at the door. The frog had come again. A little voice cried out at the door, saying,
"Open the door, dear princess. Remember what you promised me by the cool waters of the spring."
The frog came in and slept in her bed again until the morning. The third night he came again, but in the morning the princess was astonished to see a handsome prince instead of the frog, standing at the head of the bed. He had the most beautiful, friendly eyes.
"Good morning,"
he said.
"A wicked witch put an enchantment on me, and I had to be a frog until the princess should take me out of the spring, let me eat from her plate, and sleep upon her bed for 3 nights.
He then asked her,
"Will you be my wife and come with me back to my father's kingdom?"
The princess said, "Yes." And so they got married and lived happily ever after. Was a beautiful girl named Cinderella. She was sweet and kind, but her stepmother and 2 stepsisters were cruel to her. They made Cinderella do the most unpleasant chores, and they never let her do anything fun. One day, the family was invited to a ball at the king's palace. Cinderella wanted to go, but her stepmother and stepsisters strictly forbade it. They made Cinderella sew fancy party gowns and curl their hair. Then they mocked her as they left for the ball. Cinderella sat down and started to cry. Suddenly, there was a bright flash of light. Out of nowhere, a fairy godmother appeared. "Don't cry, Cinderella," she said. "I saw how poorly you were treated, and I will send you to the ball." "I would love to go, but I don't have a gown," Cinderella said. "My stepmother and stepsisters never give me time to sew anything nice for myself. All I have to wear are these old rags." The fairy godmother smiled and touched Cinderella's ragged dress with her magic wand. Instantly, it changed into a beautiful gown. Then she touched Cinderella's feet with her wand, and she was wearing beautiful glass shoes. "Thank you so much," Cinderella said with amazement. But how will I get to the ball? My stepmother and stepsisters took the horses and carriage. The fairy godmother saw 6 mice playing near a pumpkin. With a flick of her magic wand, she turned 4 mice into beautiful black horses and 2 mice into coach drivers. Then, with another tap of her wand, she turned the pumpkin into a beautiful coach. Cinderella jumped into the coach and started towards the palace. "Make sure you are home by midnight," the fairy godmother called out. "The magic only lasts until then." When Cinderella arrived at the palace, everyone at the ball stopped to admire her beauty. No one, not even her family, recognized her. As soon as the prince saw Cinderella, he asked her to dance. "Yes," Cinderella replied joyfully. They started dancing, and soon the prince fell in love with her. Cinderella and the prince danced all night. She was so beautiful that the prince did not want to dance with any other ladies. Suddenly, Cinderella realized it was almost midnight. "I'm sorry, I have to go," she told the prince. Then Cinderella rushed to the carriage. She was running so fast that one of her glass shoes fell off. But Cinderella was in such a hurry that she did not even notice. Cinderella jumped into the carriage and headed for home. Just as the clock struck midnight, she arrived. The coach turned back into a pumpkin. The horses and drivers turned back into mice. And Cinderella's fancy ball gown turned back into rags. When Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters came home, they could not stop talking about the beautiful lady that danced with the prince all night. They were very jealous, as they hoped to dance with the prince and win his heart. After the ball, the prince was determined to find out who the beautiful lady was. He did not even know her name, but he did have a glass shoe she left behind.
"The lady this shoe fits will be the one I marry,"
the prince declared. The next day, the prince began the search. He and his servants went all over the kingdom, inviting ladies to try on the glass shoe to see if it fit. Many women that wanted to marry the prince tried to force their foot into the shoe, but the prince could see they were not the lady he fell in love with. Finally, the prince came to Cinderella's house. Her stepmother and stepsisters tried on the shoe, but it would not fit. When Cinderella asked to try on the shoe, her stepmother and stepsisters laughed. How could you be the one? Her stepmother taunted. You didn't even go to the ball. But the prince insisted Cinderella trying on the glass shoe. The shoe fit Cinderella's foot perfectly. Suddenly, the prince recognized her. Even though she was wearing rags, the prince knew that Cinderella was the lady in the beautiful gown he had danced with all night. The prince married Cinderella, and they lived happily ever after.
The Emperor and the Nightingale, written by Cliff Brown. Once there was an emperor who loved music. He even collected wind chimes so he could hear their lovely melodies. Next to the palace, there was a large garden where a nightingale lived. A gardener took care of the garden and the nightingale every day. The nightingale sang very beautifully. Its songs made the gardener and other plants happy. One day, the emperor read a book about nightingales and the beautiful songs they sang. He said to himself, "I must have a nightingale." The emperor called his servant and said, "Find a nightingale and bring it to me." While searching for a nightingale, one
The Ugly Duckling. A mother duck lived on a farm by a quiet pond. She had a nest made of straw. Every day, the mother duck hoped her egg into the woods. He found a small cottage where an old woman lived at the edge of the forest with a hen and a cat.
Oh my, where did you come from?
The old woman asked the duckling.
If you don't have a home, you can live here with me.
The old woman really liked the duckling. She made sure he had enough food to eat. But when she wasn't watching, her hen and cat chased him away. "Where can I go to be happy?" the duckling cried. "Everywhere I go, I am teased and chased." Winter was coming. Snow fell from the sky, and the icy wind whipped through the trees. It was so cold that the poor duckling almost froze. One day, a farmer saw the ugly duckling.
"You look like you could use a place to stay,"
the farmer said. The duckling happily followed the farmer home. But the farmer had children, and they loved to tease and chase him. Soon, the duckling left the farm. He traveled a few miles and spent the winter in a nearby marsh. There were other birds in the marsh, but none looked like the ugly duckling. Eventually, spring arrived. One day, the ugly duckling saw a group of swans swimming on the pond. The swans were so beautiful and graceful that he had to swim closer to watch them. "Will the swans tease and chase me too?" the ugly duckling wondered. But the swans did not chase and tease him. Instead, they welcomed him as one of their own. Then the ugly duckling looked at his reflection in the water. To his surprise, the ugly duckling discovered that he was now a beautiful swan.